behind the abdominal organs, okay, to reduce friction between these organs as they move, okay, like the stomach, the intestine, or the liver. Even the liver is a solid organ, but because it is in a very close touch with other movable organs like the intestine, the colon, and the stomach. So we also cover it with this sac of fluid to reduce the friction. The parietal So the peritoneum, by this, or the sac of peritoneum, let's say, to keep it easier, so that it's one part, is made up of two main layers. The layer that's covering the abdominal wall, the internal surface of the abdominal wall, we would call it parietal layer of peritoneum. Then the part of the sac, which will continue to cover the organs, which we call it now visceral layer. And we will have the cavity between the parietal and the visceral layer, which is filled with a fluid. We call it the peritoneal cavity. The peritoneal cavity extended between the organs, we divide it usually into two parts. The main part of the cavity, which is the whole space here in blue, covering between most of the abdominal organs, between them is the greater sac. However, this small, tiny part, behind the stomach mainly, we would call it the lesser sac. Okay, and we extend this part through a small opening here, as you see it. Okay, that's located between the liver and the stomach here. If you see this opening, we take the sac of peritoneum and we expand it behind the stomach through this small opening, which we call it epiploic foramen or foramen of Winslow. So foramen of Winslow is very important because it's the passage from the greater sac of the peritoneal cavity into the lesser sac of the peritoneal cavity, okay? So it is the passage, as you see here, this is the peritoneal cavity. All of this part of peritoneal cavity is the greater sac, okay? And this is the foramen of Winslow, where we expand the peritoneal sac behind the stomach. So this would be the lesser sac, we call it, okay? So we divided the peritoneal cavity into a greater sac, the main part, and a small part behind the stomach, we would call it the lesser sac, okay? This is to show you we are here in the greater sac, a small opening that will open into a small sac behind the stomach. We would call it the lesser sac. What else? Since the peritoneum is not like the pericardium or the pleura, not covering only one organ. So the pleura symbol around the lung, pericardium symbol serous membrane around the heart. But here it's a little bit complicated because it's covering different organs, okay? And you know, each organ, as you see, like the stomach, will be covered by two visceral layers of peritoneum. One on the anterior surface and the other one on the posterior surface. So each organ to become intraperitoneal should have two visceral layers, okay, of peritoneum. One on its anterior surface, the other one on its posterior surface. So to describe the parts of peritoneum, even though it's one sac still, okay, that covering different organs in the abdominal cavity, we specify a specific name, okay, for each part of the visceral peritoneum that covering a specific organ. So if the peritoneum, like this one here, we show it, the two visceral layers of peritoneum that covering the stomach, we would call them omentum. Omentum, the single, okay? So there should be two omenta, one going from the lesser curvature of the stomach up towards the liver, and one going down from the greater curvature of the stomach towards the intestine. So if this is the stomach, for example, it will be covered by a visceral peritoneum that reflect anteriorly to become parietal. Clear? Another visceral peritoneum here, which is this one, will go behind the stomach into the lesser sac. Now we have two visceral layers, one and one. Those two, this one will continue with the parietal layer in the anterior wall. This one will continue with the parietal layer of posterior abdominal wall. Okay? So I have two visceral layers now, anterior and posterior. If the two layers covering the stomach descend down to cover another organs from the greater curvature of the stomach, now those two visceral layers, I would call them greater omentum. If they go up from the lesser curvature towards the liver, I would call them lesser omentum. Once they reach the liver, they will split again to cover around the liver. Okay? Clear? So, like this here, if you see these two layers of peritoneum here, I would call them These two layers, what would I call them?
Lesser momentum.
At the lesser curvature, lesser omentum. Okay? The lesser omentum. Okay? So, the terms that describing different parts of peritoneum, okay? Add here a letter, please, add a word here, sorry. Visceral peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum, not the parietal, okay? Visceral peritoneum has special names. So the visceral peritoneum has special names, okay, at specific regions. When this visceral peritoneum covering the stomach, I would call it omentum, okay? When it's covering the small intestine, I would call it, like here, you see, this is small intestine, this is a layer of visceral, and this is another layer of visceral peritoneum, up and down. So those two, once you see them here, two layers, okay? Double layer of peritoneum, of visceral peritoneum. They split here to become what? Parietal, okay? So those two will be called mesentery. So I would call them mesentery. So the mesentery describing the visceral layers of peritoneum covering the small intestine. What about the visceral peritoneum covering the large intestine?
Mesocolon.
The mesocolon, okay? The visceral layers of peritoneum covering solid organs. What do we mean by solid organs? Like the liver and spleen, okay? It would be ligaments, okay? But they all continue with each other. They are all one sac, remember this. But it's just covering and reflecting to cover another organ. So once it's on the stomach, it's omentum. Once it's going to cover around the liver, it's a ligament, okay? Different names in different regions. Like the aorta, it's arch of aorta, the artery, okay? Then it's descending thoracic. Then it's abdominal, okay? In different regions. But it is the same artery. Clear? So that's why we have different names, okay? And to make it easier to study the peritoneum. That's why they divide the peritoneum into these different names, to make it easier to study it. So we have omentum around the stomach, mesentery in the small, mesocolon in the large, and ligaments for the solid organ. When we go to the first part, which is the omentum, you know that the stomach is inverted or like G-shaped, okay, organ. And it has a greater curvature below and a lesser curvature up. So the omentum that descends down from the greater curvature of the stomach, as I told you, I would call it the greater omentum. Okay? What about this omentum? If you see it carefully here, this is the stomach. It's covered from behind and from anterior with two visceral layers of peritoneum. As these two visceral layers ascends up, as you see, towards the liver here, okay? So this is double layer. Always these organs, these structures which I speak about, the omentum, the mesentery, the mesocolon, the ligaments, double layer of peritoneum. Why double layer? Because two visceral layers actually covering any organ. Anterior, posterior, or superior, inferior, depending on the location of the organ and its orientation, okay? So I need always two visceral layers, okay, to cover the organ, to become intraperitoneal, okay? One anterior, one behind. So, if you see here, the stomach is covered posterior and anterior by two visceral layers. If they extend up the same layer, okay? If it goes up towards the liver to cover the liver, it will be called now lesser omentum. If it descends down from the greater curvature, it will be the greater omentum. Omentum means apron, which means مريل. مثل المريل. Look to the greater omentum, it descends down. As it descends down, it will go and cover all the small intestine. Then abruptly, at a sudden, it will go and ascend up. So the greater omentum, as it descends down, you see this is the first two layers, descending down. Then suddenly, they will ascend up and go toward transverse colon. Okay? So if you see them here, this is the two visceral layers covering the stomach. Once they go toward the liver, you see them. So now this is lesser omentum. You block lesser omentum split to cover the liver now. Okay? So now it's no longer omentum. It's a ligament. Okay? Now when the lesser omentum go down, covering around the stomach, and then descends, as you see, two layers, descending down all the way. This is the greater omentum. But look, the greater omentum, as it descends down, it reflects up again to go towards the transverse colon. Once it's reaching the transverse colon, it will split again to cover the transverse colon, as you see, from back and anterior. So now the greater omentum will become Transverse mesocolon. To distinguish which part of the colon. Transverse mesocolon. Okay? So now, look here. Most of the peritoneal coverings, the visceral layers are 2 layers. Except in this case, it is here 4 layers. Because there are 2 descending parts and 2 ascending parts. So the part of the greater omentum here will be made up of 4 layers. 2 descending, then 2 ascending. They ascend up to go and cover around the transverse colon, to become the transverse mesocolon. However, if we look to the greater omentum, as it goes, we said, from the greater curvature of the stomach, it's not just this part. There is another part superiorly from the fundus that go as it covers the stomach and reflects over the diaphragm to become parietal peritoneum here. So this now will be called the gastrophrenic ligament, because it goes to a solid organ, which is the diaphragm. The gastrophrenic ligament, okay, which is part of the greater omentum. We classify it as part because the greater omentum indicates the visceral peritoneum that descends from the greater curvature of the stomach. So if you follow the greater curvature, it starts from the fundus, it will go towards the diaphragm. So we call it gastrophrenic. Then a smaller part will go to cover around the spleen. Splenic ligament, okay? Because the spleen also is a solid organ. Gastrosplenic ligament. Then there is this part of the greater omentum which forms 4 layers. Okay, what I would call it? It descends down, as you see, go up to the transverse colon. So it will be gastrocolic part of the greater omentum. So the greater omentum is actually 3 parts. The part of the stomach that reflects over the diaphragm, gastrophrenic. The part that reflects to cover the spleen, gastrosplenic. The part that descends and ascends up to cover the the transverse colon, gastrocolic. And the gastrocolic part only is the 4 layers. Okay? So which part of the greater omentum is made up of 4 layers? The gastrocolic part. Okay? Lesser omentum now. The lesser omentum, it goes and covers around the liver. However, what's unique in the lesser omentum, okay? What's unique in the lesser omentum, if you look carefully, it does not just always, let's go to this, come from the stomach. It comes from the first 2 centimeters of the duodenum also. So the lesser omentum is covering around the stomach and the first 2 centimeters of the duodenum. So the first 2 centimeters of the duodenum is actually intraperitoneum. Okay? Now, during embryological development, duodenum is actually intraperitoneum. But because of the rotation of the stomach, because the stomach grows in anterior-posterior direction, then it rotates 90 degrees to the right. So the duodenum, as it grows, it is anteriorly located within the peritoneum. But as the stomach rotates, the duodenum will slide between its visceral layers and go to the right side, like this. So as it slides from the anterior to the posterior abdominal wall, okay, it will lose its peritoneal covering. Okay, so it becomes retroperitoneal, except for the closest part to the stomach, which is the first 2 centimeters. So that's why duodenum is secondary retroperitoneal. It develops inside the peritoneum, but then it leaves. Okay, the primary retroperitoneal, like the kidney, it develops and stays behind the peritoneal always. So that's why the first 2 centimeters of the duodenum, which is closer to the stomach, are intraperitoneal. Okay, so this is the lesser omentum, and this free margin now of the lesser omentum, if you look carefully here, this is the stomach, lesser curvature, this is the liver. هذا كله شو سميناه؟ lesser omentum. Now this part here of the lesser omentum, if you can see it, which is the free margin of the lesser omentum, okay, coming from the first 2 centimeters of the duodenum, I would call it. So it's no longer part of the stomach, it's between the liver and the duodenum. So this is what we call it the hepato, from the liver to the duodenum, hepatoduodenal ligament. The hepatoduodenal ligament, okay? So hepatoduodenal ligament is the free margin of the lesser omentum, okay? So now if we look to the lesser omentum, to this part of peritoneum, between the stomach and the liver, as it's coming from the stomach towards the liver, it's omentum, lesser omentum. However, if you look to it as it's coming from above, from the liver towards the stomach, it will be a ligament. Okay? Now, the lesser omentum itself can be having 2 names. It can be, if it is coming from the liver to the stomach, we would call it a ligament. One from the liver to the stomach, hepatogastric ligament, all of this part until here. And from the liver to the duodenum, hepatoduodenal ligament. So if you hear these terms, remember those are indicating the same as the lesser omentum. Okay? So lesser omentum or hepatogastric ligament is the same meaning. The part of visceral peritoneum connecting between stomach and liver. Okay? And this is very important now about the lesser omentum, the free margin of the lesser omentum. اللي سميناها hepatoduodenal ligament. Okay? Or a free margin of lesser omentum. Because if you look carefully, it's forming a border for this opening. شو هاي opening?
Winslow opening.
Foramen of Winslow. Okay? Epiploic foramen. Okay? Omental foramen, whatever you like. Which is connecting the greater sac with the lesser sac of the peritoneal cavity behind the stomach. We said the borders of the foramen of Winslow anteriorly is, if you remember this image, this is foramen of Winslow.
Hepatic triad.
The portal triad. Okay, the portal triad. Now if you look carefully here, this is the lesser omentum. Going from the stomach, it will go up towards the liver as you go up with the section. Okay? So look here, the portal triad between at the free margin of the lesser omentum of the stomach. Okay? The portal triad is in the free margin of the lesser omentum, which we call it hepatoduodenal ligament. So if you bring a blade and cut through this part of peritoneum, inside it you will find the portal triad passing there. Okay? Between the two layers of the free margin of the lesser omentum, the hepatoduodenal ligament. That's why hepatoduodenal ligament is a very important area, because it contains the portal triad passing up through it into the liver. Okay? So, when we speak about the foramen of Winslow, and I ask you, what's the anterior border for the foramen of Winslow? You could say it's the hepatoduodenal ligament. You could say it's the free margin of the lesser omentum. You could say the portal triad. Because within this hepatoduodenal ligament is the portal triad. Okay? Okay? What's the posterior border for the foramen of Winslow?
Inferior vena cava.
Yes, the inferior vena cava. Okay, so those are the two parts of omentum covering. Did we miss? Yes. Now, what's happening here? Internal omental herniation. We spoke last time about the different kinds of hernia. One of the kinds of hernia within the abdominal cavity. Sometimes part of the intestine can loop from the greater sac, okay, and get through this foramen of Winslow into the lesser sac here, and be trapped there, because this is a very tight foramen. So if you look here, part of intestine below can come and enters through this opening behind the stomach. In this case, it will be called the internal omental hernia. Internal inside the abdominal cavity, omental passing through the omental foramen into the omental persa. Omental persa is the same as the lesser sac, different means. So passing through the foramen of Winslow behind the stomach. And once it's there, because of tight opening here, it will become swollen. Okay? The loop of the small intestine passing there will be swollen. So in this case, we will call it internal omental herniation. A loop of intestine passing through foramen of Winslow into the lesser sac, or the omental persa. Okay? So none of the boundaries of the foramen of Winslow now can be cut. You cannot widen it up from here. You cannot cut through portal triad. You cannot cut through the inferior vena cava. Okay? So none of them can be cut. You cannot cut through the duodenum to widen. Okay? And you cannot cut the liver to widen this opening. So what's the treatment would be? Aspirating the gut content. You just insert an endoscope, okay, or a needle into this loop of intestine, or enter with the endoscope and aspirate everything. Once you aspirate everything there, يعني بتفرغ, okay, it will collapse on itself and easily pull it out, okay, from that area. However, sometimes now it would not go out. Even if it's collapsed, it will be stuck in there. You cannot pull it out. So in this case, you have to interfere surgically. You introduce a surgical opening in the abdominal wall. You enter through the greater omentum, descending part, this here, the gastrocolic part of the greater omentum. and you cut the two descending limbs here, throw them, مش كلهم, small cut. Within them, you could insert your finger now into the lesser sac and go up and push this part of intestine out through the foramen ones. Okay? So you can push the herniated loop out of the lesser sac by inserting your index finger into the lesser sac, through cutting here. The two layers, the anterior two layers or the descending two layers of gastrocolic ligament of greater omentum. Okay? Gastrocolic ligament of the greater omentum. Okay, this is the hepatoduodenal ligament. So we agreed previously this is the lesser omentum. As you see, as the two layers, posterior and anterior to the stomach, go up towards the liver, they are forming the lesser omentum. The free margin of lesser omentum here forming the hepatoduodenal ligament from the duodenum to the liver, and within it you can easily see the portal triad. Okay? The mesentery is double layer, you see again, of peritoneum covering the small intestine. The mesocolon covering the large intestine. Three kinds of mesocolon. We have that one covering the transverse colon, transverse mesocolon, the sigmoid colon, sigmoid mesocolon, and the appendix, mesoappendix. Okay? So three parts of large intestine covered with peritoneum. Okay. What about ligaments? Let me just draw you something and تسكر لي الداتا شو؟
ورقة.
Let me see if this could help you guys. So if we draw a sagittal section, this is here the abdominal cavity, okay, and I draw a midline sagittal section. So you look laterally, okay, into the abdominal cavity. What's there you can see, if you do this cut in the midline, you can see part of the stomach going here, okay? Above and anterior to the stomach, you can see what?
Liver.
You can see part of the liver going like this. Okay. Below the stomach, yes, the large transverse colon, a cross section in the transverse colon. Behind the stomach, there is important organ here.
Spleen.
The pancreas. Spleen is located, if you look like this, it's located on the left side. So here we do a cut in the midline, so we cannot see the spleen. Okay, it has been removed. Okay, so you can see part of the pancreas passing. Okay, like this, and you can see some loops of
Small intestine.
the small intestine. Yes. Okay. So how would the peritoneum or a sac would come and cover around all of these organs? So first, we will put the lesser omentum. Where should the lesser omentum be?
Behind the stomach.
Between the stomach and the liver. So I draw two lines like this. These are two visceral layers of peritoneum between the stomach and the liver. You can call them either lesser omentum or hepatogastric ligament. The most common name is the lesser omentum. Okay? These two layers first will go and cover around the liver, as you see in a cross section. They reflect back again here. So this is visceral peritoneum. Once it's reflected on the diaphragm, this is the diaphragm, the roof of the abdominal cavity. Okay? Once it reflects, it becomes parietal. Okay, it's parietal peritoneum. The other layer will go and cover the liver from below, anterior, as you see, and reflects back here. Okay, around the diaphragm, then cross the anterior abdominal wall to become parietal peritoneum. So there is a small area on the superior surface of the liver is devoid of peritoneum. It's not covered with peritoneum. Okay, this is which we call it. This is which we call it the bare area of the liver, bare, naked. Okay, And if you look to the liver, you will see it rough, okay, because it's not covered by the smooth glistening membrane of peritoneum. It's usually rough, خشن بتكون. So this is called the bare area of the liver, okay? Now, what happened here? What would the omentum do when it reached the stomach? شو بده يعمل? It has to cover as a visceral layer all the way around the stomach, as you see like this. So this is a visceral peritoneum now. Now it will leave the stomach from its greater curvature. And you look carefully, it will descend all the way down to cover over the whole abdominal intestines, covering them, okay? And forming an apron. يشكل مريلة. Now suddenly, this part will abruptly go and ascend up again, as you see, until it reaches the transverse mesocolon. So now I have two descending layers and two ascending layers. Those are the descending, those are the ascending. So if you look to the greater omentum here, which will be called the gastrocolic part, the greater omentum, it is actually 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. Okay? So the gastrocolic part is 4 layers. Once it reaches the transverse colon, it will split to cover it again. So now it will go to attach the transverse colon with the posterior abdominal wall. So this part now is the transverse mesocolon. It's distinguishing the transverse colon. So this is a transverse mesocolon. Okay? Once these two visceral layers of peritoneum reach the abdominal wall posteriorly, they will split. One will go up and the other will go down. So now we would call them parietal peritoneum. The parietal layer, which will go up, will go and move anterior to the pancreas. So you see the pancreas is not covered by peritoneum. There is no other layer behind him. So the pancreas is retroperitoneum. As it ascends up, it will go to join the other parietal part. So the complete sac is closed now, if you see. This is which we call it the lesser sac. As you see, if you look, it's completely closed now, behind the stomach. This is the lesser sac. The lesser sac, if you see, has two important expansions. It's not just actually behind the stomach. Now, if you look carefully, part of it go down between the 4 layers of the greater omentum. So this inferior part, I will call it the inferior recess of the lesser sac. So the lesser sac is not, the main part of the sac is just behind the stomach. However, it has an inferior expansion. We call it the inferior recess. This is very important during inflammation, okay, of the peritoneum and accumulation of pus or fluid. And the other potential space will go up behind the liver. You see it? This would be called the superior recess of the lesser sac. So I have two expansions, superior recess and inferior recess of the lesser sac. Okay? What about the remaining part of peritoneum? As this parietal layer descends down now, it will go anteriorly and covers around the small intestine and back again. So this is now a mesentery. Okay? Another layer will go with it and cover around another lobe of intestine, as you see. And it will continue like this. Okay? So all of these together down will be called the mesentery of small intestine. Okay? And the lower abdominal wall in the pelvis usually, it will reflect to become parietal peritoneum. So all this layer now covering. So this is, yes, the greater sac. The greater sac. So you see now, this is the peritoneum. I have the greater sac completely closed, covering around all this cavity. This is the greater sac, peritoneal cavity, and this is the lesser sac. How we connect between them, how they actually happen. If you look on the right side, okay, of the body, not in this mid-sagittal view, you cannot. If you move more to the right, you will see that there is a small opening, okay, located here. This is the foramen of Winslow, where we took the sac from anterior and push it through this opening, as I showed you in the previous lecture, and expand it behind to become the lesser sac. So this would be called the foramen of Winslow. This is the foramen of Winslow. So we took the peritoneum and bullet. ما فيش معي كيس. لو حدا معه كيس بفرجيكم إياه. Very easy. If this is the foramen of Winslow in the right, greater sac. بسحبه من الفورامين of Winslow بمنطقه. To become what? The lesser sac. Okay? So as simple way you see the peritoneum. But if you remember, look, lesser omentum, the same to become what? Greater omentum. The same part of the sac will become transverse mesocolon. It will become then parietal peritoneum. It will become mesentery, parietal again, okay? Then visceral around the liver. So they all continuous with itself. It's one sac. Remember this, okay? But different names in different regions. Okay. The last thing in the peritoneum is the ligaments. One of the important ligaments is the falciform ligament, okay, in the liver, which connects the liver, okay. As it reflects, you see that I told you there is the bare area in the liver, okay, because the peritoneum covering reflects to go to the diaphragm, okay. So bare area. If you expand the bare area anteriorly with the sac, okay, as it reflects towards the diaphragm anteriorly, it will become something like this. So a layer covering the liver from here, it will go and reflect towards the anterior abdominal wall. This other layer will go and reflects to the anterior abdominal wall. Then they both will become parietal peritoneum and split. So this is two visceral layers of peritoneum. We would call them the falciform ligament. This ligament, which connects the liver with the anterior abdominal wall and splits again, is very important. Why it reflects there? To provide a passage for the umbilical vein during embryonic or fetal life. Umbilical vein is the major part of the umbilical cord, okay? So as the umbilical cord passes through the umbilicus of the fetus, it actually goes and attaches to the portal vein of the liver. So that's why to reach the liver, you don't need peritoneum. That's why the peritoneum reflects to around the passage between these two visceral layers here, as you see here, for the umbilical vein to get into the liver. After birth, this umbilical vein will be obliterated. So we call it the round ligament of the liver or ligamentum teres. Teres, a Latin word for round. Hepatoduodenal ligament. Did you hear about this ligament? It's the free edge of lesser omentum. What does it contain? Portal triad. Peritoneal nerve supply. The peritoneal nerve supply depends on the part of peritoneum. If it's visceral peritoneum, the nerve supply will be autonomic by the same organ, okay? Covering the peritoneum covering, okay? So the peritoneum, the visceral peritoneum covering the stomach, it will receive its autonomic nerve supply by the stomach, okay? So the autonomic nerve supply coming from the viscera, it covers. However, the parietal one, since it's covering what? The abdominal wall, it will receive a somatic nerve supply, okay? The somatic nerve supply اللي هو في شو somatic general sensation. الألم pain, thermal حكيناهم حامي بارد, touch, pressure, okay? So mainly pain. So the pain you feel it exactly in the parietal peritoneum, in the same region. So those will be the lower 6 thoracic with L1, iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal, because ilioinguinal also provides sensation to the area of pubic symphysis, okay? The lowest part of the anterior abdominal wall. So if the vein was in the parietal peritoneum, it will be located exactly in the same region, okay? However, if the vein was from the viscera, it's not in the same region, because this vein will go with the autonomic innervation, then will be referred, okay, referred with the somatic nerves, those ones back into the abdominal wall. حكينا في epigastric area is a referred vein for the stomach mainly. Yes, اللي هي الforegut. In the umbilical region, for the midgut, small intestine, cecum, appendix. Okay? Cecum and appendix. اللي هي midgut part. Below in the hypogastric region, below the umbilicus, it's a referred vein for the hindgut or large intestine. Okay? And then in the pubic symphysis, by L1, ilioinguinal, it's a referred vein for urinary bladder. Okay? For the urinary bladder. So the vein here is referred, remember, but the vein here is direct in the same area because it's somatic sensation by the abdominal wall. فالابنديسايتس التهاب الزايد. Once it starts, the vein of the appendix will be very umbilical, vague vein. As it is swollen, okay, and starts to hit the parietal peritoneum now. لما تبدا تضرب irritating the parietal peritoneum, you will see that the vein is moving from periumbilical region down into lower right quadrant, okay, or lower right inguinal region. Organs relations to peritoneum. This is very simple. The stomach is intra. شو بعد السtomach؟ duodenum. شو حكينا للduodenum؟
أول
secondary retroperitoneum إنه بيكونوا بيطلع بس the first 2 centimeters which is very close to the stomach remain covered with the hepatoduodenal ligament. صح؟ Jejunum and ileum are intraperitoneal. Now appendix قبل السيكم is intraperitoneal. It has its own mesentery. We call it mesoappendix. So if you come from the ileum, you have the appendix, it's covered. Then you have the cecum. The cecum is partially covered by peritoneum. So it's covered, mobile, glistening, but it does not have a mesentery. There is no mesentery. So we call it, it's in a transitional state. بتحول من انترا عماله لريترو. ليش؟ لأنه الاسcending colon is retroperitoneal. Okay? Secondary retroperitoneal. في طالب سألني امبارح لا أنا خربطت. It's not primary, it is secondary. Okay? So what's happening here? It's a transitional state من الابندكس انترا والاسcending colon ريترو. فعماله البريتونيوم بترك الميسنتري تاعه but it's still covering the cecum. So partially covered, okay, by peritoneum. It's covered but it does not have a mesentery. Okay, you can say partially covered with peritoneum. الابندكس انترا حكينا بعد السيكم بيطلع الاسcending ريترو secondary retroperitoneum. الترانسفيرس كولون شفتوها كيف الجريتر رومنتم بغطي transverse mesocolon. So then the descending again secondary retroperitoneal, then the sigmoid is still intraperitoneal, okay, and the rectum الآن بنزل على البلبس ونازل. أول جزء أول ثيرد من الريكتم بيكون متغطي بالأمام وباللاترال وولز anterior laterally. So it's again partially covered with peritoneum. Okay, the second third of peritoneum of the rectum, the second third, since it goes into the pelvis, it becomes where below, okay, the peritoneum. So the middle part is only anteriorly covered, and then the lower part, which goes into the pelvic cavity, is not covered with peritoneum. It's below peritoneum. So in general, what about the rectum? Upper part partially covered, lower part is not covered. Okay, to make it easier. Liver intraperitoneal, except over 3 regions. We will speak about them. One of them is the bare area of the liver. خرجتكم إياها. Okay, which is the reflection. Pancreas retroperitoneal. شفتوه بالدروينج كيف؟ البرايتال انعكس من أمامه. The spleen is intraperitoneal. Kidneys, of course, primary retroperitoneal organs. When we speak about the gastrointestinal tract, abdominal esophagus very small. حكيت لكم بدخل من الاسophageal opening T10 وبدخل في الستومك على T11. Not that important. When we speak about the stomach, هذا كله لللاب. This is not in the theory. This is laboratory material. Okay, you can study it in the lab. This is first year. يعني stomach is made of cardia, fundus, body, and pylorus. وين عم بنوها؟
أيوه.
دكتور امبارح ما درسنا بدور عليها.
You didn't find it. Okay.
So
the stomach is 4 parts: cardia, fundus, اللي هي top down shape, the body, and the pylorus. Pylorus is a Greek word for the gate guard, has البوابة, because this lower part of the stomach guarding the gate into the duodenum, the small intestine. The pylorus has an entrance and a canal. Pyloric antrum, pyloric canal. Then there are 2 openings in the stomach. We have the cardiac orifice, بسميها شايفين orifice, not sphincter, okay, which is the gastroesophageal junction here. The gastroesophageal junction is the cardiac orifice. It's only a physiologic sphincter. هذا راح تدرسوها باللاب مش هون again مثل ما بحكي لكم وعرفتوا الفرق بعد كل حضر اللاب distinguish what's the difference between physiologic and anatomic sphincter. The lower part, however, the pyloric sphincter اسمها. So upper opening cardiac orifice, lower opening is pyloric sphincter. This one is anatomic, and since it's anatomic, it's physiologic. Anatomy معناته structure built in موجود في structure للsphincter. فما في structure في function. Physiology is function. So there is a function for a sphincter. So pyloric sphincter is anatomic that indicates directly physiology. ففيش داعي نحكي physiology. It's built in. But when we say physiologic, that means there is no built-in sphincter. The function of a sphincter is coming from outer muscle here, which is
diaphragm.
the diaphragm, right crust of the diaphragm. Okay? Two curves, lesser or greater curvature. Muscular, or one of the unique things ذكروا دائما في الهistology, mucosa. صحيحة. mucosa, submucosa, muscularis. بعدين هون غطى البريتونيوم الاستومك، ما في ادفنتيشيا. سيروزا. ادفنتيشيا ومعها بريتونيوم. سيروزا. اوكي؟ So it's serosa here. Now اليونيك في الاستومك انه الماسكولار لاير بدل ما هي بس inner circular و outer longitudinal في وحده ثالثه innermost. So outer longitudinal inner circular بس innermost oblique. ليش؟ مش بس longitudinal circular، شايفين؟ في كمان oblique. لأنه الاستومك is an expanding organ. بننطوا كثير صح؟ distended then collapsed. So as it is distended, if there is two layers, it's very easily إنه إيش يصير فيهم؟ tearing. So we need to strengthen the wall, okay, of this expansion. So we add another layer of muscles, okay, to strengthen the wall of this distended organ. Small intestine, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, again in the lab. Remember, duodenum حكينا في اللاب برضه السي شيب. ليش حكيت لكم سي شيب؟ مين داخل من اللاب؟ head of pancreas bended. فطلعوا فيه في الكونكافيتي of the duodenum شو فيه؟ the head of the pancreas. وتذكروا الاثنين retroperitoneal. Okay? Retroperitoneal. So the duodenum is 4 parts. الفيرست ممكن تسميه first، ممكن تسميه superior. second أو descending. third أو horizontal أو transverse. والfourth أو ascending. اللي بيهمني فيهم السكند. ليش؟ the descending. لأنه فيه راح تشوفوا الاوبننجز of the pancreatic and bile duct. Okay? The area of لما تطلعوا في السكند part of the duodenum as you see here, okay? You can see the openings of the bile duct. شوفوا البايل duct تنزل behind the first part of the duodenum من وراء طبعا. بتروح من وراء البنكرياس بعدين بتخترق الهيد اوف ذا بنكرياس وبتدخل فيه. As it enters into the pancreas, it fuses with the main pancreatic duct. Once they fuse together, they become a very large duct here. This duct, I would call it ampulla of Vater, referring to a German anatomist named Abraham Vater. Okay? فبنسميها ampulla of Vater. When a duct becomes dilated and very large, it is ampulla. Okay? Ampulla is a large duct. So this is the ampulla of Vater. Ampulla of Vater opens in the second part of the duodenum. Okay? Once it opens here, تعمل small elevation شايفينه في الديودينم. هذا السمول elevation مثل الإصبع بابيلا. فبسميه بما إنه بالديودينم duodenal papilla. لأنه في واحدة ثانية فوقه أصغر فبسميها الميجر 1. اوكي؟ الأصغر بتفتح فيها الأكسسوري بانكرياتيك داكت اللي بنسميها داكت اوف سانتوريني. اوكي؟ جوفاني سانتوريني ايطاليان اناتوميست. سو بسميها داكت اوف سانتوريني او اكسسوري بانكرياتيك داكت. انا اللي هي ماينر جودينال بابيلا. انا اللي بيهمني الميجر. ليش؟ الميجر جودينال بابيلا الان فميزوا التيرمز في بايل داكت في بانكرياتيك داكت لما يندمجوا امبولا اوف فيتر. امبولا اوف فيتر بتفتح في الديودينم. الاليفيشن اللي في الديودينم هذا اللي داخل فيه الامبولا اوف فيتر هو الميجر جودينال بابيلا. اوكي؟ مش الامبولا اوف فيتر هي نفسها الميجر جودينال بابيلا. الامبولا اوف فيتر هي اللي بتكون الميجر جودينال بابيلا. اوكي؟ Now at this point is the area where the foregut embryologically اللي هي الجزء الاعلى من الجاستروintestinal tract fuse with the midgut. Okay? This is the point of fusion now between the foregut above and the midgut down. And this is very important for the blood supply of these parts. لأنه الفورجت البلد سبلاي الارتري تاعها celiac والمidgut superior mesenteric. So this is the area of fusion between the foregut and midgut. يعني الأبر part of duodenum من الفورجت بيجي بس اللور part from the midgut. Okay? From the midgut. As the fourth part of the duodenum ascends, then it will be held here by a small connective tissue and a smooth muscle. Okay? This now part, which is holding it here, okay, it will be called the ligament of Treitz, or the suspensory ligament of the duodenum. This is very important muscle because once it's going there, it holds the duodenum up, so now the intestine can go anteriorly. Once it go anteriorly, at this flexure here, duodenojejunal junction, it will become the jejunum. So the jejunum is what? Is intraperitoneal. Okay? It should be here. Okay? Where the intestine now becomes anterior. Okay? So now we will have the jejunum after the fourth part, or at the border of the ligament of Treitz. Okay? Now the jejunum will become intraperitoneum. Jejunum is a Latin word for empty. Because in the cadavers, when you dissect, you will see part of the intestine, especially in the upper left half of the abdomen. You can easily put your hand obliquely, the upper left jejunum, the lower right, هو الجيوجينم. هو الإليم, sorry. Okay? So this is the jejunum. It's empty, found most of the time in the cadavers. That's why they call it jejunum. The ileum is a Greek word which means twisted. The most twisted part of small intestine. ليش twisted? Because it's very long. الجيجينم طوله متر بس الإليم طوله مترين. تخيلوا نفس المسافة. هنا أنت عم twisting the jejunum بس 1 meter. But here the ileum is a 2 meter tube. You twist it in the same distance. So it should be double twisting than the jejunum. That's why they call it the ileum. Okay? Jejunum, ileum, then ileocecal junction. Okay? Or valve. Distinguishing features between them in anatomy, you can read it in your book. However, there is 5 main distinguishing features. أول شيء اليومن. Okay? As you descend down, the lumen becomes narrower. Yes. So the lumen in the jejunum is wider than in the ileum. Plica circularis. Plica circularis, the folds in these small intestine, these circular folds. You see them? These circular folds are very important. لأن وظيفتهم increase the surface area. لما تزيد السيرفيس area شو بيزيد؟ number of cells. لما تزيد number of cells بيزيد الفانكشن. الابزوربتيف function of the intestine بتزيد. So to improve the absorptive function. As you go down شو بتتوقع يصير فيهم؟ Reduced in number, صح؟ So they are more numerous in the jejunum, less numerous or less count in the ileum. Okay? They are larger in the jejunum. They are smaller in the ileum. Okay? Plica. The mesenteric arterial arcades. This is the arcades يعني small arches. If you look to the mesenteric artery as it descends its branches to the intestine, it will start to form which we call it small arches, arcades. Okay? They are usually 1 to 2 in the jejunum. However, in the ileum they increase. The network starts to grow up more and more. Okay? More arterial arcades in the ileum. Fat deposition. كل ما نزلت بيزيد الفات deposition. فالفات بيكون أول شيء only near the root of the artery مش واصل للجيجينم. Look here, it reaches into the intestinal wall. Okay? The fat deposition increased in the area of the ileum more than the jejunum. وبايرز patches, very important. بايرز patches رقع بايرز اللي هم ايش؟ lymphatic aggregations. بتشوفيهم only وين؟ بالإليم. وين موجودات في الإليم؟ In the lamina propria and submucosa. As they grow up, they can reach to the submucosa in both layers. Okay? The Peyer's patches. Large intestine حكينا. Distinguishing features. كيف تميزوا large intestine عن small intestine? Especially if the small intestine is enlarged. يعني إذا ما الفود يكون في small intestine, it can reach to the size of a large intestine, an empty large intestine. However, there are 3 main features. The first thing is the hostra, or the sacules, التكيسات, these pouches, okay? This is an indication of a large intestine. Those are circulation of pouches. Why they formed, حكيت لكم? Because of these muscles. Tinea coli, okay? The tinea coli. What is tinea coli? Yes. حكينا again. في الهيستولوجي في عندي الوول ميوكوزا epithelium submucosa اللي هي الفريمورك for vasculature الماسكولاريس layer. Muscularis layer in each region has its own specification. لما بتكون الماسكولاريس layer كملوا المحاضرة الجاي يلا